Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY. On today's episode, we are doing a long-term review of the Protech Classic Mini shock absorbers. So stay tuned for that. Now, as I said, we are going to be doing a full review of the Classic Mini Protech shock absorbers. These are a set of extremely nice billet shock absorbers made by a company based out of the UK called Protech. Now, these shocks were sent to me as a review set, which means they were given to me cost-free. So I do want to disclaim that before we get into the review. I'm still going to be doing my best here to provide you guys the most impartial review I can. Now let's get into the review. After doing a considerable amount of research on the available shock absorbers that are, for sale for the Classic Mini, I reached out to a company called Protech to see about their Classic Mini specific shock absorbers and to see if they might be willing to send me a set for a long-term review. Now, the folks at Protech were kind enough to send me a set free of charge for me to do a long-term driving and living with type review on those shocks to compare them to previous shock absorbers that I've owned for the car. And I'm extremely excited to announce that Protech has decided to extend and send out a second set of these, which I will be giving away to one lucky winner. Now, if you want a chance to win these shock absorbers, I'm using the same platform I've used for previous giveaways called Gleam. That is a link down in my description. There are a few different ways to enter, from signing up to my email newsletter as well as Protech's, and visiting their Instagram, my Instagram. You guys know the drill. Entering these things in, there's a few different ways to do it, and once you enter in, you have a chance to win a full set of Classic Mini Protech shocks for your Classic Mini. I said Classic Mini a few times there, didn't I? Now, shock absorbers are one of those things that is extremely important to get right, and installing the wrong set or installing them improperly can have a dramatic impact on the drivability of your car, how well it performs, and how livable the car is whenever you do drive it. So before we get into the Protech shock absorbers, let's talk about what I'm taking off of my car. Now, I've had a few different sets of shock absorbers on my car over the years. The first set I had was just an OE no-name spec set of struts. They were installed on the car when I got it, and they were completely shot. They definitely needed a replacement. After that, I moved on to a set of SPAX, S-P-A-X shock absorbers, and they worked pretty well on the car. I wouldn't describe them as especially awesome or not great. They were just perfectly average. They were non-adjustable shock absorbers and lived on the car for, I guess, about 2 years. After that, I decided I wanted something that had a little bit more adjustability. And that's when I installed the most recent set of shock absorbers, the GAZ, G-A-Z, adjustable shock absorbers. And that's what I've been running on the car for a few years now. Now, these shock absorbers, it's time for them to come off. You guys are probably seeing videos on the side here. They are extremely tired. I have put them through their paces. I've really used these, and they were also really pretty solid set of shock absorbers. They weren't overly amazing, but they did provide the job that I needed and provided me pretty substantial performance improvements over the OE set of SPAX shock absorbers I ran before that. So from that point of view, they held up pretty well. Now, they did degrade pretty quickly over the years, and I do drive my car very frequently, and so I've put a lot of miles on those. Those GAZ shock absorbers probably saw about 11 to 12,000 miles. So they were adequately used, and they really were ready to come off of the car. Now, this is one of the cool places that the Protech shock absorbers set themselves apart from other shocks on the market in relation to their serviceability. The GAZ shock absorbers, the SPAX shock absorbers, to my knowledge, are not serviceable items. They're not something that you can send back to the companies and have them rework, fix, update the seals, all of those different things. These Protech Shocks, however, are serviceable. When after however many miles you have driven these and maybe they're starting to feel a little bit of the age, maybe they're not working quite as well as they used to, these are not an item that you would just throw away. This is something that you can literally mail back to Protech. So pop them off of your car. Your car might be off the road for a little while, but you can send those shocks into them. They'll update the seals, the fluids, they'll check everything over and refurbish and send you back a fully refurbished set of Protech Shocks. So this is one of those things that really goes overlooked a lot of times with some shock absorber companies, or not really even just shock companies, all companies. Products these days are made to be disposable. And you can definitely see that in the Classic Mini, whether it is wheel bearings, whether it is rubber seals, things that used to last a really long time on the Mini or that might be easily repairable are now just secondary discarded items. And rather than taking your old shocks and simply throwing them away, you can take them off of your car and reuse them and simply get a brand new, effectively a brand new set of shocks back on your car for considerably less money, and you know that they're good, you know that they're gonna last a long time again, and it's pretty awesome, I think. So that is one of the reasons I went with these shocks. Now on the flip side of that, these shocks are a little bit more expensive than maybe some of the other ones on the market, but I think that's an enormous selling point, and I buy my things to last. I buy my things to be serviceable. That's why I have the maintenance-free ball joints on my car, because I wanted them to last. I didn't want to fuss with ball joints that weren't gonna last a long time and give me the full life of the product on my car, because I use my car a lot and I want it to drive well for a long time. One of the ways that you guys can tell that you might need to replace shock absorbers is the ride becomes more harsh, the rebound starts to behave very weirdly. Specifically, you might have way too much bounce, too much rocking in the car, or you might not have enough of it and it's like riding on a brick. Now, there are other factors that kind of contribute to those feelings as well, such as degraded cones. Needing to replace the suspension cones in the car can be a huge factor. And the shock absorbers, no matter how good they are, can't combat a set of cones that is completely shot. So for reference, in modern cars, you have a coil spring. In the Classic Mini, instead of that coil spring, you have a rubber suspension cone. It's literally a cone of rubber, and they degrade over time because rubber unfortunately degrades. Now my car has a set of the adjustable coil springs. I did a video quite a few years ago on installing these. They have been really, really great. I love those coil springs. The car drives very, very well. I haven't seen any sort of degradation in the coil spring, the way it behaves, anything like that, since installing them however many years ago it was. But there is something that I see that's a common misconception about these, or I guess some myths about those coil springs, and I don't want to get too deep into this because this isn't really about coil springs, but it's extremely important that those are installed correctly and with the parts that are necessary for a coil spring conversion. I go over all of that in my previous video, so if you want to see what I'm talking about, check that out there. And if you don't do that, that is where coil springs tend to fail, or you have issues with those coil springs that people love to post horror stories about. Now let's talk about the Protech shock absorbers and why I chose those over a set of adjustable Spax or Koni or KYB or any of the other brands that are out there. Now the Protech shocks are specifically made for the Classic Mini. This company is a small company based in the UK, and they have experience with the way Minis drive and the way they should drive. And so those adjustable struts are actually made really strictly tailored to the Classic Mini. They sell struts for other cars, and they sell different kinds of like coilover conversions and stuff for the Mini, which is super cool. I won't get into that. That's a whole can of worms that we would have to do another very long video about. They also provide the adjustability I wanted so that I could set the rebound, which is how quickly the shock returns to its natural state. They have that adjustability that I was looking for, while also balancing comfort and ride quality. My car is not a race car, despite it having a turbo and being very fast. The car is daily driven. It's driven on the road most of the time, and its track days are less frequent than the amount of time that it's on the road. With all of that considered, the Protech shock absorbers seem to be the perfect solution for me, because they have that adjustability and you can increase their rebound, you can increase their firmness on the days that you want to hit the track and days that you want a really, really aggressively performing Mini. So let's get into the actual review of how they drive on the car and what the base settings are for these shocks. Now, I'm not going to cover the installation of these shock absorbers. I've done videos on shock installation in the past. This has been something that's been covered in multiple videos, and the process is not very difficult. The hardest one to install is the one behind your fuel tank, and that just requires you to empty your fuel tank, remove it so you can get to the top of the strut tower. But I want to take a moment and show you guys what these look like when they're installed. As you can see, they have a pretty cool look about them. This aluminum casing helps them differentiate themselves from other companies. Most use a steel casing or some other sort of alloy casing. These are lightweight aluminum alloy with a nice dust damper up here at the top to cover the actual strut itself. And then of course you have your adjustability right here on the front. Now this adjustability dial has a couple of settings, and I want you guys to hear what it sounds like when you adjust it. Now you can probably hear that has a nice audible adjustable click. And that's really nice when you're working on these cars, because sometimes it's difficult to hear or see what you're actually working on underneath the car. And this is going to give you that audible click to know when you are adjusting these. Now the reason I bring that up is that in some setups, or rather some shock absorbers that are on the market, the noise itself is very quiet, or it doesn't have any sort of physical or audible click. So you don't really know how adjusted they are. They've really thought this through. This also has a small flathead screwdriver drive on it. So if you can't reach it with your hand, you can get in there with a small screwdriver and turn it that way instead. Very, very well thought out. The settings that I run on my car are 10 in the front, and then if I recall, in the back I run a 7 or just slightly less aggressive back there. And the reason I do this is because you are wanting to support the weight of the engine in terms of how much it rebounds. And those settings have felt the best for me personally, my driving style and the places that I drive. This might be different for you, and I encourage you, if you get a set of these shock absorbers, to really just take your time, drive the car around, see how it feels on speed bumps, see how it feels on corners, all of the different driving places that you are going to be driving the car. Test it out and try some different settings. That's the one thing that's so fun about these shock absorbers or adjustable shocks in general, is that you have this ability to kind of play with them and see what works best for you. Let's jump in the car and go for a quick drive, and I'm going to talk to you guys about how the car feels, what you can expect from these shocks, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of insight into what it was like to drive these in the mountains of North Carolina too. All right, so now we are out on the road, and we're actually going to see the benefit of these shocks, whether or not they're better than the ones that we had on the car before, or worse, or, you know, stay the same. So I think before we get into the review of the shocks, I think you guys probably know, and I can guess that you probably want to hear the blow-off valve and the turbo. I mean, it's only reasonable. So let's go ahead and just get that out of the way. So there you go, blow off, turbo, things are still working perfectly. Now, on the road, this is where we're gonna start to see how these shock absorbers behave at the settings I have them set to. Now you can see in my body the amount of bounce that's happening, and it's not very much. A Mini is a generally bouncy kind of vehicle, but when we hit larger bumps, like the one we're gonna be coming up to here shortly, that is where we're gonna see the biggest impact of good shock absorbers. So here we go. One little bump, and I just got a small jostle, but nothing like excessively bouncing, throwing my head all over the place. That's what you're gonna see with shock absorbers that aren't correct for your car or aren't tuned and adjusted for the way that you are gonna be driving your car. Now, in addition to that, let's take a corner here and have a look and see how this behaves. Now you probably could see on the outside shot of the car the droop that's happening with this wheel, and that is where we're going to see the biggest benefit from these shock absorbers and their resistance in pushing that wheel back down on the ground. This is going to help you maintain that traction, and when you hit bumps on the road, the speed at which those shock absorbers return the wheel to their standard position is how you are going to help keep traction on the ground. And these shocks are doing an exceptional job of that. Now, these shock absorbers aren't going to suit every single person's driving style. In my case, I have what most would describe as a fast road style driving, and that is where I like to have some speed, have some performance, but I don't necessarily want to sacrifice all of my comfort on the road. Now, if you are looking for something that's just dramatically more comfortable, more smooth and cushy and compliant, these shock absorbers, even at their softest setting, are probably not the perfect shock for that. That said, you are not sacrificing much in the way of comfort with these shocks if you are electing to choose these over, say, a set of Spax or Gaz shock absorbers. In comparison to my Gaz shocks, these are just wonderful. They're super comfortable. I could see taking long trips in these. In fact, I have taken multiple 100-mile trips in these, and it's been stellar. So with that, you guys have probably been seeing superimposed on this video here an image of the outside of the car. Now, let's go over a few speed bumps and get a better idea of how these are going to perform on speed bumps, and it's going to show you guys what it looks like inside the cabin in comparison to what it looks like on the outside of the car, and how those shocks are starting to absorb that bump and that speed bump. So here we have our first speed hump. Now you saw inside the car, I wasn't jostled too much, and in fact I took that speed bump at about 30 miles an hour. Not too bad, and the bump on the outside of the car, you can see how much that shock is actually absorbing that bump. Very, very cool. So all in all, these shocks are great for regular driving with a little bit of performance added. Now, let's head back to the garage, and I'm going to give you guys a sneak peek into the driving video from one of our recent events called Classic Minis United up in the mountains of North Carolina. So now that you've seen some comfort driving, let's take a look at what this might look like on a mountain road. Now, I didn't do a lot of filming at this Classic Mini event because it's the first one I've been to in a few years where I had my own car, and I really just wanted to enjoy the event, drive it, and just spend the time learning the car and getting to know all of the new stuff that has been put on it. Now, one of my lovely patrons, Kenny, who bought the mystery engine that you guys probably remember from some previous episodes, that whole build I've chronicled, and you can go check out that playlist if that's something that you'd be interested in. He drove his Mini from Fort Worth, Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, all the way to Virginia. Round trip, he did almost 4,000 miles in that Mini. He didn't tow it, he drove that thing the whole way. But, lucky for me, he was actually wonderful enough to be the chase car for my car in some of the videos that you guys are about to see. Now, you'll see in the videos on the left, the Protech Shocks are doing an incredible job of helping to keep those wheels on the ground. And that's really what the shock absorber is meant to do. Your coil spring or cone has the job of kind of supporting the weight of the car, and they are there to absorb a lot of the bumps and the big jolts and things like that. But the shock absorbers are there to normalize that across the bumps themselves. And so the shocks you can think of similar to the way a bike shock works as well. The faster it rebounds, the faster that wheel returns to its original place, which was either down or up or whatever place it needs to be. That's how quickly it's going to return to that state. And when you're going around these corners, as you're hitting bumps in the corners, as you are going down these mountain roads, all of that helps to determine how well that wheel remains gripped on the ground. And let me tell you guys that this car handles amazingly. The tires that I have on it are the Yokohama A008s. These have been really, really wonderful tires. They were good in the wet and the dry. But one little interesting thing is that people who had the same tires that I did were not gripping as well on the ground despite having the exact same tire. And what I'm attributing that to is how effective these shocks were at applying that downward force quickly and returning those wheels to the state that they need to be in to generate that traction. I was hitting these corners really aggressively, and almost every corner I was staying planted on the ground. I was not shifting in the back very much at all, where my friends taking that same corner, driving the exact same way, would lose their back end a little bit, would have oversteer, understeer, all these different things. And I was just not experiencing that with this car, which is really, really great. It's something that I cannot recommend enough. So with driving those in the mountains, with driving them here in the city, I really feel like these are some of the best shock absorbers I have ever owned. I cannot recommend these enough. And if you guys are looking for a set of fast road shocks, look no further than these Protech shock absorbers. They are incredible, just incredible. So I do want to say a huge, huge thank you to Protech for sending these out. I did mention before that these were sent to me as a review set to provide you guys with a review of them on a Performance Mini, as well as in comparison to an older set of Gaz shock absorbers. So if you guys have any questions about the things I talked about in this video, feel free to post those in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer those. And one small thing I want to mention, step over to my toolbox with me. I have a small announcement. I recently released a brand new sticker, a Motor On sticker. For those of you who've been with the channel for a while, you probably know this is my little catchphrase at the end of every video. And I finally decided, let's make a sticker for it. So now we've got a full set of different Classic Mini DIY stickers. These plus lots more on my merch store. So if you want to help support the channel, head over to the store and pick up a new sticker. Now, I just want to say again, thank you guys for tuning in on this episode. It has been a pleasure to review these and give them a go. If you guys have any Classic Mini parts that maybe you'd like to see me review, post those in the comment section below. I love hearing about new products, and I love hearing about new Mini stuff, because there's always really cool products hitting the market pretty frequently with the Mini community. And I want to help you guys find those and also give you guys an impartial, clear review on those products. So let me know if you guys have any suggestions. But that is going to wrap up this episode. And until I see you guys on the next one, you know the drill. Enjoy those minis and motor on. On the side. Hey, Damon. You brave boy. Come here. What's going on in here? Hi, bud.
Bye.
That's okay. Bye. Damon, come here. Hey. Damon. I'll just said. That's what you want. Damon, you want to come be on video? Bloop. Where are we? Come here. Oh, he's a good boy. I'm afraid of this place. Too many loud noises. Hi, buddy. You good boy? Wait, no, don't leave me.
No, you're on video. It's like, gotta go.
Gotta go, that's enough.